my 3-year-old, she's singing. She goes, I don't need a man. I need a puppy. If we are not the breadwinner, who are we then? Still.
The way I look at feminism is the model for healthy men, because what feminism did for women was, as you said, it opened the doors. I can go be whatever I want. But we still haven't told boys and men.
Richard, welcome to the Modern Masculinity Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I ask all of our guests to take us into their world and just share the load, the challenges, in some circles, the crosses that you as a man, as maybe a father or a partner or whatever roles you sort of play, even in this stage in your life, what are you still mucking through, if you will?
I think I'm still mucking through who I am as an adult male, because I went from my teen years, graduating college, almost immediately into the relationship that then became my marriage. And so I spent the next 30 years either being a husband to someone who unfortunately had certain emotional issues that I became a caretaker for fairly early on. And then after some infertility, we became pregnant. And then the 3 kids came. And for a good portion of my life, I was making decisions for myself that were not for myself. So divorce is now 8 years past. And I'd have to say, I'm still mucking through, who do I really want to be? And I think mindful masculinity is an example of how that's manifesting itself.
Yeah. Well, you and I are there together. I don't know that I foresaw divorce in my cards. And so it's funny when I go and I meet somebody, or there's a girl that I'm sort of dating or talking to. And I remember early on, it was like, I was like, so what's your deal? Right. I was just as a joke, like, what's wrong with you sort of thing. And she goes, what's your deal? And I'm like, it's easy. I've got 2 kids. I went through a divorce, all this, and I'm only 34 and I'm here. And so when people hear the sort of life experiences that I've had at this sort of age, I think a lot of them are shocked, frankly, and that's okay. All that to say that I don't think that you can ever plan when you're going to go through an experience like that. And that's never something that you go, okay, now I'm ready now let's let the divorce, let's let the world fall apart, let the dream, let's go through that process, that whole grieving process and separation process and working through the kids. We go I think it seems like a convenient time to go through that. So I don't know that guys can ever it's one of those things that you just sort of got to be ready and prepared for if and when you're sort of called to duty.
Absolutely. And I think through a life, if you're paying attention enough, you're picking up bits and pieces of it. You've kind of got maybe not a clear North Star, but certainly something that you're gravitating around, the belief systems that you start to say, that feels really good for me. I'm really believing in that. So I do believe if you're not paying attention, and I know a lot of men who never paid attention, and they found themselves lost after a divorce, after they retired from work, a career. And so I think it's so important, mindfulness and meditating, and it kind of lets you sit above things a little bit and you observe things and you start to see patterns both of life and of yourself. At least that helps a little bit.
Yeah. Let's be clear. This is the first recording that I've done since my ex and I have gone through legal proceedings, and in the middle of it, it came first from my kids, which was an interesting thing. And then she brought it up in the courtroom, but we were never legally married, but through the state. We had a $20,000 wedding. Everybody came. We had the wedding, we lived together. There was everything except the state was involved. And part of me in the moment, I was 25 when we went through that, let's just call it, I guess, a ceremony. I don't know, because the kids came home one day and they said, you and mom never got married. And I was like, oh, I didn't know this. It was news to me. And they're like, yeah, she said you guys never got married. And I was like, well, we had a wedding. So I say all that because maybe that means something to somebody out there. And I do understand that that is even stickier when you have to separate assets and you have to get the state involved to say that you no longer have to be with this person. But if anybody who's listened to the show for any amount of time,
Not to mention custody of children.
well, that's what we're going through now and in the middle of it. And so that's its own sort of thing. And so I say all that both to be technically and legally correct, and also for somebody who goes, but he's like, I have to honor that. Yes, we didn't have to divvy up assets, and there wasn't a lot of assets to divvy up. But the point is that men are sort of thrown into these situations, environments, and I think that they have this opportunity to utilize it as a place to grow. Right? I was lost. It was the first time for me that I had a chance to actually think for myself, because for the first 20 some odd years of my life, it was, what are my parents, what does my family want me to do, what, let me stay in line there. And then I got into every sort of into relationships, and okay, let me do things to Mr. Nice Guy, happy wife, happy life sort of thing. And now all of that crumbled. And yes, I had the kids, but it was the first time where it was like, what do you actually want to do? And I had never given myself the space until then to actually even ask and answer that question honestly.
Before you got married, did you have a career path that you felt strongly about, that you were like, you were building something? Or when you got into the marriage, did you make a choice based on the marriage?
Yeah, looking back on it, I did. I had built a sales business, and we had a ton of success and record breaking years and all the trophies. And I just realized that I was just not fulfilled and happy though. I was miserable and at the time rich, for at least for a 25-year-old, right? I just had way more money than any 25-year-old should have. Or I made way more money. I spent it just as quickly as I got it, because I was looking back on it, I was looking for what I thought money was supposed to give me. Oh, it's supposed to give me fulfillment or confidence or self-worth or all these sort of things. And so it's like, well, okay, it hit the bank account. I don't feel that yet. Let me go and try and buy those things. And those are very expensive mistakes. And so when she got pregnant, I realized that the path that I was on, and the industry and sort of the business that I was building, was not conducive towards being the father, and at the time the husband that I wanted to be. I was working 50, 60-hour weeks. I was 6 days a week. It was grind, 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 and that was not what I wanted to do. And so this is 2014. So if I would have held on, maybe, like, I'm looking back on it, I'm like, man, maybe you could have held on, because the internet changed things and social media changed things. All iPhones and all this sort of stuff changed, but I ended up starting an online business from there, so I could work from home and be home. And at the time, I thought being around what I was optimizing for, spending time, being present, like that's all the things that I heard growing up that were important, and I definitely still think that they are. What I didn't realize though was that time away and going out of the house, and there's something there. It doesn't have to be the man, but there is a masculine energy to leaving, going and doing something productive, and then coming back with sort of the fruits of that productivity. And we were together. So there's all those sorts of things. But I did decide to spend more time with the family at the expense of making more money, or knowing that it was going to make less money. And did that cause the demise of our relationship? I think it definitely impacted it. And I think it was also still the right decision.
Did you have, going into the marriage and becoming a father, did you have an image of who you wanted to be, or was it a blank slate for you and you were kind of making it up as you went along?
I had some loose ideals, right? I knew that I wanted to be like a family man. I had this ideal of my dad did some things right, a lot of things not, like most dads, probably like all dads.
Like most,
Yeah, like all dads, I'm sure. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to have a family. I wanted kids. I knew that. And I wanted them to like love and appreciate. I wanted there to be an appreciative relationship between us, right? Where it was sort of that classic, like, oh, my dad didn't love me sort of thing, right? Like I never wanted my kids to, I'm sure they still do feel that way, but I wanted to do what I could to make sure that that I could that wasn't sort of the case, all that. So I had those sort of ideals. What I didn't have, though, that I built sort of afterwards, or not even built, I sort of discovered and built upon, was who I was outside of my family or work. And I remember early on at an event, early in this process at an event, someone asked us to introduce ourselves. And I've mentioned this on the show, but I think it's worth repeating, to introduce themselves without talking about their family or their career. And I was like, fuck, I don't know. That was mostly what it came down. That was, I could give you 2 paragraphs of those things, but if you take those away, it was like, well, shit. And I really started to wrestle with that question because it bothered me, right? I love having the right answer, or at least having an answer, especially to something like that. And so it was then where I went, okay, well, if you took all that away and you had to start over, because there was a number of moments throughout the whole journey where it was like, you could lose it all. And if that was the case, what then? And it was like my brain and my mind fought to actually have an answer, right? When my ex and my daughter, they were both in the hospital, and my wife codes and almost dies while she's pregnant with my daughter, and they save them both. Like, it's just like there was multiple moments where you just sort of, okay, and if so, what are you going to just are you going to wallow in that forever, or if and when you have to pick yourself up, what, like? And so unfortunately there were a number of those times where I had to like wrestle with those questions. And so thankfully, if you listen, there are some answers that emerge from those, that when things are not in crisis mode can sort of become this North Star. And so it was probably the worst. This whole relationship was probably like the worst and the best thing to ever happen to me. It's like the hardest and the best, most what's the word I'm looking for? Not fortifying, formidable.
Revelation.
That's not even the right word. It's like what builds you, right? It's like, reminds me of like a crucible. That idea of what it's either going to break you or it's going to make you. So you sort of have the choice to decide.
And the nice thing about that whole concept is the pressure of a crucible. Hopefully, at the very least, you learn who you are going through that process. And I had some peaks and valleys before my marriage started falling apart. And I think I was picking up bits and pieces of who I was and realizing I needed to go do something that I currently was not doing. One of my favorite stories that I try to tell people when they talk about finding their North Star was I was middle management at American Express. I was sort of a chief of staff to the senior vice president of $1 billion division. And I used to run his communications for his distributed network of sales and client managers mostly. And I come back from a town hall that Tom used to give me a 20-minute slot where I kind of ran it because he didn't want to be standing up there the whole time talking to his employees for 90 minutes. So I come back to my desk, and one of my sales vice presidents was in town from the West Coast. And I'll never forget, and if I'm not allowed to curse on this program, let me know. But I'm sitting at my desk and I'm getting ready to hit the send button on the post town hall survey. And I feel this presence over my shoulder. So I look up and there's Marianne. And I'm like, is there something I can do for you? Or are you standing here because you need me to do something? And she goes, no. She goes, what the fuck are you doing sitting in this cube? And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? I was like, did I forget to be at a meeting or something? And she goes, what you just did for 20 minutes during that town hall, you should be teaching this to people. You should be in front of audiences showing people how to do this, she said, because I've never experienced what you just did for 20 minutes in that conference room that we just left. And it kind of gnawed at me for days that I was pushing down a talent that I had, that while I knew I'd been a public speaker long before I joined American Express. So I was used to standing in front of audiences. But now here's somebody from a Fortune 500 company telling me, stop minimizing yourself. And so as my marriage progressed, I wish I'd paid attention because I was minimizing myself there as well. Didn't want to rock the boat. But like you said, I was trying to make this other person happy, at least create an environment where they could be happy. And I was deprioritizing Richard, deprioritizing. And I think that's a very male thing. And I think men don't get credit for this. I think women, you see memes on social media about how women have to give up everything in order to be a mom and someone who works outside the home, blah, blah, blah. Men do that too. Maybe not as many in volume or percentage as women do. But I know lots of my male friends who totally subsumed who they were for this role of husband and father. And that is a very male masculine thing.
Perhaps. I also think that what's not given enough credence to is sort of the conditioning that I like the conditioning that young men have gone through at the time of their upbringing. And I think that our future generations will look back on this time and they'll go, "Oh, there was a very skewed view of masculinity in this particular time." Especially because, I mean, why wouldn't there be when we're going through the feminist sort of post-feminist movement, which I think has all of its sort of merits in its ideals. I don't think that the ways in which that it happened, we can talk about all the equality and fairness. What I think is just not given credence to, given that phenomenon, is the effect that it had on young men. And there's no conversation to, okay, women were given this place in society. Fantastic, great. They're able to vote. They can go out in the workplace and earn their own. Amazing, fantastic. What we didn't, and now we're sort of catching up and conversations and got, I think I'm probably the least popular of one, but there are a lot of guys who are now sort of starting to have this conversation about like not like what about us, but to your point, it's like, okay, if that's the case, who are we then still? Because if we are not the breadwinner, okay, that's fine. No reason you can't go out and make your money and have a career. But what does the role of a provider then? And if it does not just mean money, what does it mean? Because that's something that I've sort of realized is that I used to think it was just money. And so, okay, if I wasn't making the money, then I wasn't being a provider. And of course, that is a part of it. But what I wasn't seeing was that being a provider is about having foresight. So if I'm not going to be the one that's making the lion's share of the money, how can I make sure that we are prepared? How can I make sure that what is the foresight? How can I see into the future and make sure that our family is ready? And just things like that where we're missing the essence of it, right? The protectorship, right? Where there's so many instances that get blown up on social media these days where a woman is getting attacked and guys are standing around watching this woman get beat up. Some of them are filming, and it's just like, it's such a bastardization of quote unquote masculinity. And also the comments are, why would he go in and protect her if he's just going to get punished for doing that? Right. There are a lot of instances where the kind of some that have been more popular in the media, but it's been bastardized where guys don't even want to partake in those because of this and toxic masculinity and all this sort of stuff. And so I don't think that enough of the conversation goes to, okay, here's the context that all of these young men and older men, even guys like you whose moms were part of the feminist movement, or like we've been living with feminist thinking women in for, I guess, probably 2.5 generations now. And so that's great. And what are the implications that it has for men? And how are we helping them to sort of deal with the new situation?
Yeah. One of my favorite topics I actually wrote about the 4 reasons why I'm a feminist. I wrote last week for my Substack because my take on whatever you want to call masculinity, I mean, the word is so amorphous to me at this point because I just feel that it comes with too much baggage. I use mindful masculinity for my Substack name because I'm trying to convey a message that there's this thing that we've all been talking about ad nauseum, and it's the mindful part that comes first. Because what mindful means to me is that a person is living in the present moment, that they are trying to be as aware as possible of how they're reacting to any situation, whether it's marrying a woman who makes more money, finding yourself in a situation where you need to quit work because your child has an issue, your wife makes war, your partner, whatever. And your role as a dad or a parent is to take care of your kid. And so, to me, the way I look at feminism is that feminism is the model for healthy men. Because what feminism did for women was it said, stop limiting what you can be. You want to be a stay at home mom? That's your choice. You want to be a hybrid mom? You work at home, but you also have a job outside the home? Fine. You want to be a complete outside the home mom and then take on that third shift of additional labor when you get home? Look, you make those choices, and hopefully through mindfulness and communication with your partner, and if you don't have a partner, on your own, you do the best you can. And I think that's when men still get hung up, is we're always trying to create masculinity in relation to women.
Can I tell you where at least the younger, and once again, I can only speak from a 30-something-year-old perspective, and I see it even more. It's gotten worse when you look at the 20-somethings, and I can't imagine what the teens sort of face. But there's this song that it came out a few years ago, and my daughter, when she was maybe 3, she sang it, and it pissed me off so much because I think it spoke to what I'm talking about. And the song it says, and it's in this nice jingle, right? And my 3-year-old, she's singing, she goes, "I don't need a man, I need a puppy." And I go, that's the problem that we're experiencing, is because feminism, and like I said, I can appreciate feminism in its ideals. And perhaps there were things that were captured or things that were not perhaps emphasized, or things that, once again, were bastardized of the ideology. But the challenge that I have with feminism is that it doesn't create a space for men in relationship. It says, like, it takes that to the nth degree where they don't need a man. They don't, and perhaps they could point it back at us and go, well, for the longest time, men didn't treat us and were abusive, and yes, 100%. But I don't think there was ever a time where we said we don't need women. I don't think like there was ever. It was actually, we were willing to abandon our morals ourselves. We were able to go to the depths of human depravity, oftentimes over a woman and for a woman, right? It was like a lot of times these wars and all of these things, when it comes down to it, it's doing for resources. It's doing for, okay, so why do we want more resources? Well, we have more resources. Like it's for women. And I think that, again, it was bastardized, but what is slowly starting to creep through in the most woo-woo of spaces is this, what I call integrated masculinity and sort of integrated femininity, which is it's the yin and the yang. It's an acknowledgement that on one side of the circle is mostly white and a little bit of black. And on the other side of circle is mostly black and a little bit of white. And somehow we've seemed to have forgotten that in me is you, and is you and me, and in a man is a woman, and is a woman and is a man. And that I think we get caught up in this we get lost in the gender stuff, and we forget that there are these polarities that are sort of timeless. And if we're only on one side of the pole and we forget the other side.
I understand the polarities. Help me understand the polarities, because I have had conversations with men in person and online, and when they've used the word polarity, I kind of get lost in an ambiguous space.
Here's the polarity of it, right? Here's a perfect example, and I'll give you. Well, let me ask you first: would you want the metaphor or the direct case example? I'll give you both of them, but
Because I'm a man of words, so
okay, I'm going to give you both, but which one you want first?
give me the literal one first.
So the literal one is what I see guys all the time doing, and especially with like very quote unquote dominant women, is they ask them where do they want to eat. Ask them where do they want to eat. Like, where do you want to eat? Where do you want to eat? They're giving that they're giving that power to them because they think that that's what they want, right? And if you were to ask most women, they would probably say they don't like men telling them what to do. They're just like in their heads, they don't like telling them what they do. And they also hate it when their boyfriend, their husband asks them where they want to eat. And they would much rather prefer, in most instances, and we're talking generally, for them to say, hey, we're going to go here today. I love to go here today. And to offer, right? Like they talk about these, they want men to quote unquote lead, right? And so the polarity is what I've liked into like a furnace, right? A furnace is nothing without the fire, and the fire is nothing without a furnace, because a furnace, what it cannot do is it cannot bring that life force, that energy. It's just not built for that. It's way over indexed in its ability to provide structure. It's way over indexed in its ability to provide direction, so that if you provide something like a fire, which is the opposite of polarity, it has no structure. It's so wild and dramatic in its form, and thus that is its power. That is how it does what it does, is through that chaos. And so the polarity is that you have this essence that is very rigid and structured. And of course, it's got to be able to withstand the heat. So it's got to be able to get hot, right? And then you have this fire. And it's only when you put the two together that do you have something that is greater than the individual, right? And so that's sort of how I see polarity. When I think about polarity, another polarity is maybe like the nurturing and the discipline polarity, right? They're sort of on the same like length, right? If someone who's hyper disciplined, they're usually like the best ones are because they care, but they get so far into this pole, and it's oftentimes because they over index in their ability to nurture. Whereas you have these people who are nurturing, you see these like they're the yes parents, right? Where they over index this way. And so it's this balance, right? That is necessary. And what I feel we've been living in is the women, and to their credit, should they go out and have a career? Should they make an impact in society? Like, absolutely. That's not the point. The point is the pie has just gotten so much bigger. And so now we haven't really had the conversation to talk about, okay, so now that the pie is bigger, what's the expanded roles of us? And unfortunately, that requires both parties to be in dialogue, right? Like, we can't go on. And then you start to look at like,
I wouldn't say unfortunately. I would say fortunately, they have to be in dialogue.
I can only draw this conclusion from my own experiences and what I see on social media. So when those two line up, that's where I'm going, okay, this is not truth or reality, but perhaps this is a microcosm, right? Perhaps my experience is a microcosm of what is happening in society. And it just seems that women at a large, let's call it the contemporary, the ones who aren't on either sides of the poles, right, are not ready to have that sort of conversation about what is the larger role of a man, right? When you, and I asked my ex this one time, and I said, because she said, I don't think you're man enough to be with me. That's why I started the show. So I'm like, fuck does that mean? I wanted to find out. And we're 115 episodes in, and I don't know if I've got an answer. But a few weeks or months later, something came up, and I asked her, I was like, well, this is when we were still sort of trying to work through it. I asked her, what do I tell if I'm telling Cash, like, here's what it is to be a man? We were going through some of that stuff, and we were talking about that and being tough, and we were trying to toughen him up a little bit. He was not having as much confidence. And so we were having that conversation with him. And I said, okay, so for Kyra, what does it mean for her to be a woman? She couldn't answer it. And that kind of gets caricaturized on television, where they go, what is a woman? And they're talking about genitalia and stuff. I don't even know if they're ready to have that conversation. Okay, if say, what is a woman ideally, spiritually, holistically? What is a woman? And if they can't define that, or if there's not a consensus there, it's hard for us to say, okay, well, here's how we can fit in.
I agree with you in the sense that pop culture, whether it's on a small screen, a big screen in a movie theater, social media on your phone, I agree that there are these voices that are trying to help any person define femininity, masculinity, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. I've been studying the whole concept. I do not have a degree. But the woman that I'm currently seeing, she and I were having these discussions 4 years ago. And so I started pulling down abstracts from research from all over the world, not just the United States, principally the US and Canada, but only because it was more close in proximity to my experience versus Sweden or Kenya, or whatever. So, anyway, and what I've learned over these years of studying this is that gender, the manifestation of being a heterosexual male, heterosexual female, is extremely contextual. It is very driven by society and culture.
I think we should take that out though, right? I think we should take out like gender, because I don't think that we're talking, because I talk about energies, because even if you look at a lesbian relationship, there's clearly a masculine energy and there's clearly a feminine energy.
Right, but I would say that a lesbian is not a heterosexual female. So that individual may have lived a life that projected more of these qualities, these traits.
My point though is that even if you take away gender, these energies still exist, and that's they tend to manifest themselves more and over index more in masculinity, tends to index more, and we could talk about it's expected of more from people who are born with penises, and femininity is expected more from people who are, and often it seems to be to index more. So I'm happy to agree to that and say that there is that perhaps there's too much pressure on people born with penises to act a certain way and people born with vaginas to act a certain way. I'm willing to take all of those out.
I would like to, but I would say to you that what you were talking about before, the fact that you're sensing that men are struggling because feminism has opened so many doors for women and men haven't adjusted to it yet. What I would tell you is that is the result of culture and society.
And that's a great point. And I hopefully you're willing to engage in this dialogue, and my energy is not.
I am. I'm enjoying it tremendously.
Some people get off put by it, because you pointed on a big distinction. We are not upset at women and their rise in sort of the marketplace and their opportunities. Like, and that's sort of what I think gets sort of pigeonholed or strawman or whatever sort of the issue, the debate term is, because we are, as a whole, men are not, we don't necessarily feel like, I don't think that there are men who go, a woman can't do that job or they shouldn't do that job. I think that there are bigots who have preconceived notions that are just, they're just bigots and they're racist and they're all those sorts of things. But an integrated man doesn't go, oh, because a woman is a woman, she can't do their job. An integrated man goes, who's the best person for the job? That's who should be doing the job. And an integrated man goes, what? Maybe more men should be firefighters. Maybe more men should be firefighters than women, and that it's okay because of X, Y, and Z, right? And I live here in Southern California, where we recently had kind of a big debacle, and there was this big thing about gender equality and firefighting and all these sort of things. And it's just like, if we've gotten so far past it where now we're losing sight of the essence, right? And the problem that men have is not that women have gained more opportunity. And again, once again, the integrated man isn't. It's the one who's doing the work. They're not. The challenge for young men, at least, is that women aren't even seeing a need for them in their lives. They don't even see a need.
I think pop culture does that. I think,
Well, we can't separate the two though. You really can't.
but what I would tell you is that while that may be a message from pop culture, I will project back to you that the reason why Taylor Swift sells out 45,000 seats in an arena night after night after night is because women still do have a need for men. And that what you're telling me is more of, to me, it's like a trauma reaction. It's a, I need to be defiant as a female. I need to say these things because I have experienced certain things in my life that make me feel like I am less than. Is that is that actually what they think and feel? I personally don't believe so. I personally believe what I see from having 3 young adult children is that women are just looking for someone, young women are looking for someone who will just take them as they are. And the problem about the integrated man that you've been talking about is, does he see himself becoming a registered nurse? Does he see himself becoming a middle school teacher? Because what feminism did for women was it said, as you said, it opened the doors. I can go be whatever I want. But we still haven't told boys and men, what do you want to be? Because if you think you have to be a fireman, you have to be in construction, well, guess what? There's some pretty damn good high paying jobs being a registered nurse in a hospital, and you can have a damn good life. But you're not thinking that way because that's still not considered something you're open to. And so that's why I say feminism is the model for men getting out of this funk, for finding equality with women, is by saying, I'm going to go be whoever the hell I want to be without memes and social media and stupid male characters on television and movies. I'm going to go write that chapter on my own. And men need to feminize themselves in the sense that they need to liberate themselves. That to me is the connection between feminism and masculinity, is let's redefine it the way women redefined it being a woman.
I think you did a great job of scandalizing that headline and making it seem way more controversial than it is. Because I would agree with all that. I mean, like I agree to all of that, and I'm even willing, because I don't think blame is a helpful.
It's awful.
It's not a helpful anything. It's not a helpful energy, and so it's fun for sake of debate and for sake of argument and to create a side, and I get that. And also, the truth is that it is the responsibility of men to do what you're talking about and liberate themselves and wake up and pull themselves out of this matrix. That the unfortunate side about feminism is that I think, again, in its ideals, it was great, and in its practicality, like so many movements, gets sort of hijacked for certain reasons, and to talk about the 10-15% that sort of was negative about it, and there's 85%, I think, is minimizes the movement. And that's not my point. My point is exactly what you're saying, is just, okay, now we're here. What do men need to wake up to? And unfortunately for me, it took a divorce. It took my life sort of crumbling for me to liberate myself from that and to stop looking at the models of social media, or to look at the models of these things. And the challenge with social media these days is that for a long time, when I was growing up, it was sort of propaganda, but it was good. I mean, like, I can't but help that think that there was some sort of, even if it's a collective consciousness that pushes it to where you have Homer Simpson, Tim the Toolman Taylor, Al Bundy, Ray Romano, According to Jim. I mean, like, the list goes on and on and on about buffoons who were husbands who somehow got hot wives, but are just this exact, what I think is toxic masculinity. Like, I think that is, it's obviously not aggressive, it's not violent, it's not berating, but I think it's I don't know, it's probably not equally as toxic, but it's not as helpful.
Why do you think, because I agree with you, I talk about this all the time in my Substack, is that popular culture does not create healthy male role models. Why do you think society creates those role models? I would love to have.
Well, the second part of it today, the challenge though is today it's that it's not actors creating that content anymore. It's these are like people. They're people on the street that are getting interviewed, and you hear these things that they're saying. It's people on that they bring in these podcasts where they bring in just 12. Oftentimes it's two guys and 12 girls. Just two guys are oftentimes very highly structured debatists. They're very intelligent, and they just bring in 10 to 12 girls who are not of any. I don't want to judge them in any sort of way, but they're not bringing them in for their academic acumen. They're trying to get a sample size of women of the popular general women, and so you hear some of these ideas that they're echoing, and it scares me because I don't know. I sort of index higher on the conspiracy theorist sort of index. So I would like to think that there is just something that causes media to put men to sort of like defang and declaw men. And also, as I sort of talk it out, I think that if I were in a position of power and I wanted to maintain power and sort of keep the masses pacified, yeah, I would emasculate the men. I would take their spirit out. I would dampen their opportunities. I would make it harder for them. I would do everything exactly that happened over the last 50, 60 years. If I wanted to make it harder for individual families, frankly, to thrive, like that's exactly what I would do. Is weaken the man.
I mean, I think what you're describing is sort of 21st century capitalism, which certainly is much more directed at shareholders, whether they're taking money from females or males who work in these companies and redistributing it to people who can buy big chunks of stock. I don't think that's gender based. I think that's capitalism the way we've constructed it in America. And I think you see this with women CEOs and men CEOs. What I will say, though, is that I do believe that men don't spend enough time thinking about how is the world changing and what do I need to do to adjust to it? Because we have had issues with filling healthcare jobs, despite the fact that they are fairly lucrative in certain job classes, and men still don't apply. So changing the way we men look at capitalism, to me, would be a healthy thing for men. And is that powerful people emasculating us, or is that us looking at a narrow definition of masculinity and saying there's a hell of a lot more to create in this world if I think differently? And I don't have the answer to those questions, but I don't necessarily believe it's being forced on men. I think a lot of men have just said, this is the way I was raised, this is what I was told to believe, and they're going along with an old script.
Yes, and if it was in people's best interest, if it was in, and to your point, I've never really thought about capitalism in that way, and that the guardrails aren't really there to they're not there to prevent something like this. Because if it was in their best interest for men to be healthy and thriving and confident and not suffering, then there would be money that would be pumped into it, and it would be it would be an initiative, and it would. And to your point, those things, these conspiracy theories, so like I enjoy them because I just enjoy a good story, and it's like, well, why not? If I'm going to love a good story, like why not make it one that's actually matters to me instead of this fake one? And so I do, and I also realize that in order for those things to work, we have to sort of give our agency over. Like if as long as we take our agency and we keep and retain our sovereignty, even as an individual, right, as like a soul level, that whatever is going on out there is sort of like that happens outside of us. And to your point, there's no blame. Maybe there is a big boogeyman out there, and still we have the opportunity to go out there and impact our own lives and make a difference and make a change. And still we can't discount our own agency amidst all of these things, all of the circumstances. And I like to bring light to the context, because it's sort of like when you have like either goggles on or you're out of windshield and it's really foggy and like all if you don't realize that you're looking at a foggy lens, it's it makes it even harder, right? If you all of a sudden start to realize, oh shit, it's dirty and you have that perspective shift, well, all of a sudden maybe you can clean the lens, maybe you can change it, but if nothing else, you're sort of able to step outside of it and you're not beholden thinking, oh my God, this is how the world is. No, you just have a bunch of bird shit all over your window and you just need to clean it up.
Agreed. And I would guarantee you that if we could measure this somehow, the majority of human beings live with bird shit on their window and never know. That's why they see the world the way they do. I would totally agree with you on that.
Right. And so hopefully these conversations can just give some context to what is going on. And also, at least for me, as we sort of bring it at home, it's like these things help me to go, oh, that's not me. I thought that I was thought that way or acted that way or believed that way. Like, no, that was just this other bullshit that somehow got programmed or really like I allowed it to program itself in my psyche. And that's what's been running. And that's that bird shit that if we can clean that out. So.
And I'll tell you, you're starting to sound a little bit like a Buddhist.
Well, I'm there. I'm about all of it. I studied Taoism and Buddhism, and I'm for it all. It's like, if you can help, tell me. I don't care what you look like or what you read, what book you comes from. All right, let's bring this home, Richard. I got two more questions for you. The first one is, if people want to get more in touch with you, read the Substack, follow up, just get more involved, where's the best place for people to go?
By all means, you can go to Mindful Masculinity on Substack. It is where I do my long form work. I'm starting to do more video. So by all means, would love to see people there. Subscribe and follow. I was on a live stream a couple of months ago with a buddy of mine. So I haven't done it because I just never can remember to do it. So I do more video. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram. I have yet to launch my TikTok, but I understand that algorithm is better for getting new people to look. So look for me on TikTok soon. The most important thing is what you're doing here, which you've said a couple of times. We need to have conversations about these things. We need to have open conversations where we're listening to each other, because we don't have to necessarily agree. But if we stay in our echo chambers, we're going to have more bird shit on the windshield and not know it. And I really enjoy hearing what you're experiencing in life and how life looks to you, because it's quite a bit different than mine. And I don't want to project that I have the only belief system that works so that people can flourish more. So I really think you're doing a great job, and keep going.
Thank you. I appreciate it and receive all that. My last question is, in your opinion, what is the definition of modern masculinity?
My definition is a person, let's say they have a penis, who doesn't restrict themselves. That if they find out young in life that they want to be a stay-at-home dad, they feel no shame about it. They feel no restriction about it. That's what they want to be. And they're going to go be it. So it's that kind of thing where you're truly liberated to take whatever it is that sits inside your heart and your head and just go be him the best that you can be. That to me is what a modern masculine man looks like.